The tempest howled like a vengeful spirit across the rugged Scottish moors, its fury unmatched as Evangeline Duval stumbled through the oaken doors of Blackthorn Manor, her sodden gown clinging like a second skin, revealing the desperation that had driven her through the night. She collapsed onto the velvet chaise in the vast library, the fire's embers casting elongated shadows that danced upon shelves laden with ancient tomes, her breath ragged as she clutched a borrowed linen shirt. His shirt, draped over her shoulders for warmth, the fabric still carrying the faint scent of sandalwood and authority. Duke Ronan MacLeod, emerging from the gloom with a lantern in hand, halted abruptly, his chiseled jaw tightening at the sight of this ethereal intruder. Her auburn locks matted against pale skin, green eyes wide with a mix of defiance and vulnerability that pierced the silence more sharply than any thunderclap. "Who dares invade my solitude at such an hour?" Ronan's voice rumbled, deep and resonant, echoing off the paneled walls as he set the lantern down, illuminating the scratches on her hands and the rope-like burns from reins that spoke of a perilous journey. Evangeline straightened, pulling the shirt tighter, her posture a blend of fragility and unyielding resolve, as if she were a statue come to life amid the storm's chaos. She had ridden for hours, fleeing the invisible chains of her father's decree, the arranged union that threatened to snuff out her soul's fire, her secret passion for sculpting in the ateliers of Paris, where marble yielded to her vision, not to societal edicts. But now, trapped by the deluge that had washed away the only bridge for miles, she faced the man himself. Ronan, the enigmatic duke whose reputation for stoic duty preceded him, his dark vest and cravat impeccable even in the dead of night, his stance radiating the quiet power of one burdened by legacy. "I seek no charity," she whispered hoarsely, her French-accented English laced with exhaustion. "Only shelter from the heavens' wrath until I can continue my path." Yet as their gazes locked, a flicker of something unspoken passed between them, a spark in the dim light that hinted at destinies entwined beyond mere coincidence. Ronan's mind raced. The estate's isolation was his sanctuary, a refuge from the political intrigues of Edinburgh and London, where his family's alliances hung by threads as fragile as the storm-ravaged bridge. He had accepted the betrothal to Evangeline sight unseen, a strategic move to bolster his influence, never imagining she would appear like this. Raw, unannounced, stirring instincts he long thought dormant. "The bridge is gone," he stated flatly, moving to stoke the fire, his broad shoulders flexing under the strain of concealed surprise. "You're stranded here, Miss Duval, whether fate or folly brought you." As the flames roared back to life, casting golden hues across her face, Evangeline felt a pang of uncertainty. This was no mere respite, but the precipice of an unforeseen trial. What secrets lay behind his composed facade? And how could she reveal her intent to shatter their engagement without igniting a greater storm? The night stretched onward, heavy with unspoken questions, the rain a relentless drumbeat against the glass. What would you risk in such a moment of raw exposure, when fate thrusts you into the unknown? Comment below and share your thoughts. Your insights fuel these tales. Morning light pierced the heavy drapes of Blackthorn Manor, pale and unforgiving, as Evangeline awoke in a guest chamber swathed in faded grandeur. Silk bed hangings of deep crimson, a four-poster bed that whispered of bygone eras, and the distant cry of gulls over the loch. Her body ached from the night's ordeal, bruises blooming like dark petals on her skin, but it was the weight in her chest that pressed heaviest, the knowledge that she was now captive in the domain of the man she had come to confront. Dressing in a borrowed gown from the housekeeper, Mrs. Firth, a sturdy Scottish woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense air, Evangeline descended the sweeping staircase, her footsteps echoing on marble floors etched with the MacLeod crest, a reminder of the legacy she threatened to upend. Ronan awaited in the breakfast parlor, a room bathed in soft sunlight filtering through mullioned windows, the table laden with porridge, fresh bannocks, and steaming tea that carried the earthy aroma of heather. He rose as she entered, his attire now a tailored coat of forest green over a crisp waistcoat, his dark hair neatly combed, yet shadows lingered under his steel-blue eyes, betraying a sleepless night. "Miss Duval," he greeted, his voice measured, pulling out a chair with courtly precision. "I trust you rested well, despite the circumstances." Evangeline nodded, seating herself with poise that belied her inner turmoil, her hands folding in her lap to hide the tremble. She had been raised in the salons of Paris and London, daughter to a viscount whose ambitions spanned continents, yet her heart yearned for the chisel and clay that let her shape her own world. As they ate, conversation unfolded like a cautious dance, Ronan inquiring about her journey, Evangeline deflecting with tales of the storm's ferocity, the horse that had bolted, leaving her to stagger to his stables. Beneath the pleasantries, her desires simmered. To study under Maître Laurent in Paris, carving figures that captured the human spirit's essence, free from the suffocating bonds of marriage. Ronan, sensing her reticence, shared fragments of his own life, the burdens of managing Blackthorn, a vast estate teetering on financial edges due to poor harvests and shifting alliances, his mother's untimely death leaving him to navigate solitude and duty alone. "One learns to endure," he said, sipping his tea, his gaze distant as if peering into memories of laughter long faded. Evangeline felt a reluctant pull. His quiet strength mirrored her own hidden resolve, yet she feared it masked the control that had crushed her mother's artistic soul years ago. Secrets weighed on her, the portfolio of sketches tucked in her salvaged bag, preliminary designs for sculptures that could redefine her path. By midday, as they walked the mist-shrouded gardens, rhododendrons dripping with dew, Ronan pointed to a locked greenhouse overgrown with vines. "My mother once tended rare blooms here," he murmured. "A sanctuary from the world's demands." Evangeline's pulse quickened. Perhaps in this shared vulnerability lay the key to her plea, or the trap that would bind her forever. The afternoon sun strained through thickening clouds, casting a sallow light over the greenhouse as Evangeline and Ronan stepped inside. The glass panes, streaked with grime and fogged from decades of neglect, distorted the outside world, turning the garden beyond into a watercolor of shadows and muted greens. Vines snaked across iron frames like forgotten promises, curling in on themselves as if guarding secrets long suppressed. A chill clung to the air, mingling with the scent of damp earth, decayed leaves, and faint perfume of wilted orchids, reminding them that time here had not been kind. Ronan's hand lingered on the rusted key, twisting it with a slow, deliberate turn. The door groaned open, a sound heavy with history, and Evangeline stepped forward, her borrowed gown brushing against thorny stems that snagged and scratched like whispered accusations. Dust motes swirled in the hazy light, catching on her hair, on the folds of her dress, making the air seem almost tangible, alive. "It's been sealed since her passing," Ronan murmured, stepping aside. His voice carried a weight that surprised her. Not the controlled, diplomatic tone she knew, but one threaded with memory and reverence. Evangeline's eyes roamed the interior, orchids drooping with forgotten pride, herbs tangling together in quiet rebellion, empty benches layered with dust and shadow. Here was decay, but also promise if one had the courage to see it. Her hand caught on the workbench, brushing aside layers of dust to reveal a set of carving tools. Chisels, mallets, and fine files, worn smooth by decades of labor. Her breath caught. These belonged to Ronan's mother, a sculptor whose talents had been hidden behind duty, expectation, and society's relentless judgment. Evangeline's fingers trembled slightly as she traced their curves, the weight of history pressing into her palms. Memories surged of her own secret sessions in her father's attic, clay and stone yielding under her hands, the quiet rebellion of creation her only sanctuary. She created beauty here, Evangeline whispered, lifting a small marble figure half emerged from its block. The sculpture, a woman straining free from stone, shoulders squared, chin lifted, seemed alive under her gaze, defiant even in stillness. Ronan stepped closer, eyes narrowing, a trace of intrigue flickering through the guarded composure he so carefully wore. Few knew of her talent, he admitted, voice softer now, tinged with something Evangeline had never heard. Duty demanded she prioritize the estate, the alliances, including ours. The words weighed heavily, and Evangeline felt the gravity of her own position pressing down. The bridge remained impassable, cutting them off from the world. Days of waiting stretched into uncertainty. Yet she felt no fear. Instead, resolve coiled in her chest like a living thing. I came not for shelter, she said, turning to face him, spine straightening, green eyes glinting like sunlight on wet stone. I came to beg release from our betrothal. My heart belongs to Paris, to Maitre Laurent, to Clay, to the life I've fought for, not to a union forged for politics or obligation. Shock rippled across Ronan's face, subtle at first, then widening as comprehension struck. His composure cracked like ice under pressure, the cool detachment he wielded so expertly giving way to something raw, immediate. You risk everything. Your reputation, your safety, for clay and stone? His tone was more than incredulity. It was challenge, disbelief, and unspoken admiration all at once. He stepped closer, the air between them thick with charged silence, an invisible spark that neither could deny. Yet amid the tension, something deeper kindled. Proximity brought intimacy. A brush of hands, the tilt of a head, a shared exhale, and Evangeline felt the stirrings of a connection neither expected. His guarded longing mirrored her own hidden desires, a yearning for freedom, for choice, for a life not bound by duty or expectation. Thunder rolled outside, shaking the greenhouse, sealing them in isolation, heightening the electricity in the space. Evangeline's heart thrummed with urgency. Would this confrontation destroy her dreams, or forge an unanticipated alliance? Could she risk revealing more of her soul, more of her ambition, in front of this man who might hold the key to both her freedom and her heart? Or would silence preserve safety but suffocate possibility? The greenhouse seemed to hold its breath with her, waiting for the answer. Weeks bled into one another at Blackthorn Manor, each day a delicate balance between confinement and discovery. The bridge, still under repair, cut Evangeline off from the wider world, forcing her and Ronan into shared routines that grew increasingly charged. Mornings began in the greenhouse, sunlight diffused through misty panes, illuminating her careful hands as she tended to reviving flora. Lavender and rosemary perfumed the air, a quiet counterpoint to the ever-present drizzle outside. Her fingers brushed soil, clay, and paper in a rhythm that felt like therapy. while Ronan's sporadic presence became both oversight and unintentional mentorship. He spoke of his mother's sculptures, their hidden delicacy, the sacrifices she had made for propriety, and Evangeline, in turn, allowed small windows into her Parisian ambitions, describing ateliers alive with fire and defiance. But serenity was fragile. Letters from her father arrived with increasing urgency, brought by a messenger daring enough to cross the half-finished ford. Each parchment carried political weight, a marriage meant to consolidate influence, each word a subtle warning that delay threatened both personal safety and family honor. Evangeline read them in silence, her knuckles white around a brush, feeling the invisible chains tighten even as her mind longed for freedom. Ronan, for his part, wrestled with practicalities and morality. Estate ledgers revealed debts pressing down upon him like unseen stone. The union's dowry could relieve financial strain, yet every moment spent with Evangeline's laugh, every spark of her defiance, deepened his reluctance to coerce her. He found himself caught between duty and desire, admiration and restraint, the old formulas of power and politics clashing against an emerging, unexpected intimacy. Their closeness took shape in quiet gestures and subtle competitions. Chess by the hearth became both strategy and flirtation, her audacious moves prompting his concentration and reluctant smiles. Walks along the mist-veiled loch were punctuated by confessions. The fear of becoming a shadow, the loneliness of inherited responsibilities, the longing for a life unbound by expectation. Even the accidental, the touch of a hand steadying her across slick stones, eyes lingering over tea, carried a weight neither admitted aloud. Yet misdirection and doubt thrived in Blackthorn's shadowed corners. A misplaced locket, engraved with Ronan's mother's gentle words, surfaced one morning on Evangeline's work table. Its presence ignited a whisper of jealousy she refused to name, a fear that his heart might be already claimed by memory rather than her. And the letters continued, silent threats threaded through paternal concern, reminding her that the world beyond these walls would not pause for their unspoken affections. Amid these tensions, growth emerged unexpectedly. Ronan commissioned local clays and marble, providing her tools, watching as she transformed raw material into expression. One afternoon, she modeled a small bust, her features illuminated by the glow of the greenhouse's filtered light, and he truly realized, how she reshaped not just stone, but the atmosphere itself. Admiration shifted into something tender, almost dangerous, the kind of intimacy that could neither be ignored nor denied. The chapter's crescendo came one evening in the library. Rain pelted the manor's stone walls, firelight flickering across shelves heavy with tomes. Ronan read aloud from a botanical journal his mother had treasured. Her sketches sprawled across the desk between them. "You see beauty where others see weeds," he murmured, his voice low, deliberate. Their shoulders brushed, a simple contact, yet it sent warmth through her spine that defied caution. Outside, the storm raged, a mirror to the internal turbulence that threatened to overflow. And yet, the clock ticked toward separation. Repairs on the bridge moved slowly, each day a reminder that this enforced intimacy was not permanent. Evangeline felt the tug of hope, the allure of connection, and the icy pull of reality. Was this bond fleeting, a momentary flame in an indifferent world, or something worth defying the currents of duty, politics, and expectation? She stared out at the loch, rain-slicked paths reflecting a gray sky, and wondered if courage could outweigh consequence. Could she risk her heart for a future still uncertain, for a man whose own obligations might one day force them apart? The answer had yet to come, but in the whispered silence of Blackthorn Manor, it trembled on the edge of possibility, waiting for the storm to break. The attic was silent, save for the soft creak of Evangeline's boots across ancient boards and the occasional whisper of wind through the gabled windows. Dust motes floated like trapped stars, catching the sunlight that filtered through cracks in the shutters. She moved carefully, brushing past crates and forgotten trunks, each step stirring memories of the manor's long-forgotten corners. Her hands trembled with anticipation, not for riches, but for discovery. Each crate held fragments of a life hidden away, secrets preserved behind layers of neglect. It was in the far corner, beneath a stack of marble molds and a faded tapestry, that she found it. A sealed envelope, its wax emblem cracked but unmistakable, bearing the unmistakable crest of Ronan's family. Evangeline's fingers hesitated, heart pounding. With a deliberate press of the thumb, she broke the seal. The parchment inside was brittle, yellowed with age, the handwriting elegant yet tremulous. Ronan's mother's final wishes. But this was more than instructions for the preservation of sculptures. It was a confession. Her arranged marriage had been loveless, constrained by duty and expectation, and she urged her son not to repeat her errors. Do not chain another to duty's altar as I was chained. The letter read, each word a hammer striking Evangeline's chest, reverberating with the ache of her own fears. Ronan was no mere enforcer of tradition. Perhaps he, too, was trapped. His stoicism a shield against inherited pain, a mask that hid longing and doubt. The realization crashed through her certainty like winter waves against cliffs. Later that afternoon, the greenhouse, revived under her care, was awash in sunlight, the panes gleaming after recent repairs, the air fragrant with lavender, rosemary, and the damp warmth of earth. Evangeline confronted him, letter extended, trembling not from fear but fury and hope entwined. You knew this, yet you'd bind me to the same fate? Her voice quivered, a fragile thing carrying accusation, sorrow, and empathy. Ronan's expression shifted. The blue of his eyes darkened, stormy with vulnerability. He stepped closer, then paused, as though approaching too fast might break them both. I locked away more than the greenhouse, he admitted, voice low and raw. I hid my own desires, feared weakness, feared failing my family, feared repeating mistakes that were never mine to make. The weight of confession altered everything. Stakes soared. Her father's letters, carried by a determined messenger, promised imminent arrival, threatening to reclaim her in disgrace. Ronan's creditors pressed quietly but relentlessly, reminding them both that the dissolution of the betrothal could cost him the estate. Duty and desire collided with unprecedented intensity. Betrayal burned hot, sharp against the undercurrent of attraction. Evangeline felt deceived, yet the honesty woven through his words drew her closer. Argument erupted into action, tension flaring into a kiss, fervent, desperate, a mingling of salt and fire, a declaration of feelings unspoken. Ronan's hand rested against her back, pulling her into him, lips brushing hair, jaw, shoulder, each movement cracking the armor he had worn so long. I never wished to cage you, he whispered, reluctant as he pulled away, leaving them both trembling. But doubt lingered like mist. Was this true, or merely necessity wrapped in tenderness? The questions gnawed at her, tugging between flight and trust, freedom and desire. Ronan, silent now, vowed within himself to reconsider their path, willing to risk reputation, wealth, even family expectations if it meant honoring this fragile honesty. The greenhouse itself seemed to bear witness. Blooms revived under Evangeline's touch stood tall, petals reaching toward sunlight, mirroring the tentative hope growing between them. Adversaries yesterday, now confidants. Hearts once armored, now cracked open. Their bond was nascent, profound, yet as precarious as the weather outside, where clouds scud across the sky, carrying both promise and storm. The revelation had altered everything. What remained was choice, trust or retreat, love or duty, and neither option promised ease. But in the quiet after confession, among the scent of earth and flower, Evangeline felt the stirrings of courage she had never known. The courage to hope, to defy, and to step forward into a future uncertain yet undeniably hers. The loch's waves crashed against the jagged rocks below Blackthorn Manor, a relentless rhythm that mirrored the turmoil churning within Evangeline. Rain spattered the windows like icy fingers, streaking the glass and dimming the afternoon light. It seemed the very elements had conspired to reflect the storm inside her heart. The bridge, still precarious from recent repairs, groaned beneath the weight of an approaching carriage, its wheels splashing through puddles on the half-mended planks. Evangeline's breath caught as the sound of hooves echoed across the loch, carrying with it the inevitable arrival of a presence she had hoped to delay. Her father, Viscount Henri Duval. Henry's entrance was nothing short of dramatic. The carriage door flung open with a harsh clang, and the Viscount, large and imposing, stalked across the manor's stone floors as though they were a battlefield. Lead-gray clouds rolled overhead, their oppressive shadow pressing down on the estate like a physical weight. Evangeline felt herself shrink into the doorway, the corridor narrowing in on her. Each step her father took a drumbeat of impending doom. His eyes, sharp and relentless, swept over her as if measuring her in pieces, dissecting her spirit. "You leave me no choice, Evangeline," he thundered in the drawing room, tapestries depicting hunts and conquests seeming to sneer at her. "You presume to dictate terms of your station, to squander your future for this absurd fixation." His hand waved dramatically toward her modest sketches and half-finished sculptures, objects that, to him, were mere trifles. "This is not Paris. You are not an artist free to chase dreams in the salons and ateliers of France. You are my daughter, and your duty is not negotiable." Ronan, standing silently near the hearth, felt the tension coil around him. He had thought Evangeline's courage would suffice, that her quiet resistance and honesty would carve some space in Henry's rigid world. But now, seeing the Viscount's fury in full force, the cold calculus of politics pressed in. He could offer her no easy escape. Any defense risked inflaming Henri further, endangering both Evangeline and the fragile estate that had weathered storms far less forgiving than rain. Evangeline, meanwhile, felt the walls of the manor, walls that had once seemed protective, closing in with suffocating pressure. Her sculptures, her hands' labor of love and defiance, were dismissed as frivolous whims. Her words, entreaties for a chance to follow her art, were swallowed beneath her father's thunderous declarations of obligation. The betrothal, he insisted, was unbreakable. Attempts to negotiate were met with threats of disinheritance. Each phrase carved another notch in her despair, her heart trembling beneath a weight she had never anticipated. By nightfall, the manor was silent but for the wind's mournful cry and the creak of settling beams. Evangeline retreated to her chamber, the dim candlelight flickering across walls lined with canvases and sketches. fragments of a life she could not yet claim. She sank to the floor, knees drawn to her chest, staring into the tarnished silver mirror above her dressing table. The reflection that gazed back was a stranger. Pale, hollow-eyed, the artist within her buried beneath fear and expectation. She traced the curve of her jaw with trembling fingers, as if trying to awaken the Evangeline who had once molded clay in secret, whose hands had coaxed beauty from unyielding stone. That Evangeline seemed so distant now, almost unreachable. Desperation clawed at her chest. She packed a small bundle of belongings, clay, brushes, sketches hidden beneath folds of cloth, and considered a midnight flight. The bridge's treacherous planks, the storm-lashed lock below, the ever-watchful eyes of servants, all threatened to conspire against her escape. And yet, the thought of leaving Ronan, the man whose presence had become an anchor, whose honesty and quiet devotion had begun to penetrate her defenses, tore at her resolve. Were his kisses genuine? Or had they been pity, carefully measured to prevent her rebellion from fracturing the alliance too severely? The questions burned like fire in her chest, each one a knife twisting deeper into her uncertainty. Ronan, meanwhile, wrestled with his own torments in the study. Ledgers lay open before him, pages cluttered with numbers that spelled danger in stark, impersonal clarity. The marriage's dissolution might rescue Evangeline's freedom, but it risked bankrupting the estate, imperiling tenants, and dishonoring his mother's memory. Each line of calculation seemed to press on his chest like iron bands, weighing heavier with every tick of the clock. Yet forcing her to stay, submitting to his father's unspoken approval, felt like betrayal of the one thing he could not measure in numbers, the fragility and brilliance of her spirit. As the hour grew late, Evangeline crept from her room, wrapped in shadows, intent on taking whatever risk remained to seize her freedom. Her heart hammered in time with her cautious steps down the staircase. That's when she overheard her father's voice, thick with authority and menace, pressing Ronan. Yield her dreams or forfeit the dowry. Do you understand me? This union is not optional. It is your responsibility as much as hers. The words struck her like a blade. Hope, fragile and flickering, seemed to vanish in an instant, replaced by a leaden despair. She was trapped between duty and desire, between the man who had begun to stir her heart and the father who would see her ambitions crushed for the sake of inheritance. The storm outside howled in concert with the storm within, wind rattling panes, rain thrumming on the roof, the manor groaning as if mourning her predicament. Tears flowed unchecked. She curled into the cold floorboards, her cheek pressed against the polished wood, and allowed herself to grieve, not just for the limitations imposed by others, but for the freedom she feared might never be hers. Every whispered hope, every stolen moment in the greenhouse, every tentative glance or brush of a hand, now felt precarious, vulnerable to ruin. She questioned if courage was enough to defy the expectations of men who wielded authority as sharply as any sword. The night seemed eternal. Shadows danced across walls, cast by the flickering candlelight and the storm beyond, blurring the line between imagination and reality. Every sound, footsteps in distant halls, the rustle of draperies, the distant clatter of servants securing the manor, became amplified, a reminder that she was neither entirely safe nor entirely free. And yet, amid the despair, a subtle ember of determination began to stir. It was faint at first, a whisper against the roar of hopelessness, but it existed. The knowledge that she had agency, however limited, that she could make a choice, however dangerous, that flight, defiance, or even a confrontation with Ronan and her father might yet bend fate in ways not yet imagined. The manor's silence bore witness to her anguish, its halls heavy with history and expectation. Yet, in the cold and darkness, Evangeline clung to the faintest glimmer of resolve. She would not surrender entirely, not to circumstance, not to family, not to the world that seemed determined to cage her spirit. Even as the storm raged inside and out, she held tight to the fragile, persistent heartbeat of possibility. That courage, once summoned, might yet carve a path to freedom. The night pressed on, long and unyielding. Evangeline lay on the floor, her eyes fixed on the silvered mirror above, searching for the girl she once was, seeking the woman she could become. The storm's howl outside seemed to echo her own unspoken question. Could freedom and love coexist in a world dictated by duty and inheritance? Or was she destined to remain a shadow, a cautionary tale whispered through generations of the Duval family? The answer had yet to come. But for the first time since her father's arrival, Evangeline felt the stirrings of defiance, fragile and trembling though they were. Somewhere between despair and hope, in the quiet of her chamber and the echoing halls of Blackthorn Manor, the first seeds of a plan, and perhaps of a rebellion, began to take root. The night had been long, the manor silent but for the mournful sigh of wind over Blackthorn's jagged roofs. Evangeline remained awake, curled amid the soft scent of lavender and damp earth in the greenhouse, her fingers tracing the contours of a half-finished sculpture. Moonlight spilled through the glass panes, fractured by streaks of rain and fog, casting silver shards across marble and clay alike. The figure she worked on, a woman emerging from stone, shoulders squared, chin lifted, gaze defiant, seemed to mirror her own state of mind. Fragile, yet unyielding, shaped under pressure, yet poised to break free. In the quiet hours, clarity began to seep into her thoughts. The letter from Ronan's mother, discovered only days prior, no longer felt like a threat or a warning. Instead, it became a lens through which she could view him with new understanding. His secrecy, his stoicism, his guarded demeanor, they were not acts of control, but echoes of his own confinement, a reflection of the duty and expectation imposed upon him. Pain, she realized, had built walls around both of them, walls that only courage and honesty could dismantle. Evangeline rose, stretching cramped muscles, her gaze drifting across the greenhouse. Each plant she had nurtured over the past weeks, the lavender, the rosemary, the delicate orchids, stood as a testament not just to her skill, but to her persistence. Growth could emerge even in neglected soil. Perhaps, she thought, people could grow in the same way. Resolute, she decided that morning would be the moment of truth. As dawn crept over the highlands, brushing the loch with pale gold, she sought Ronan in the library. Firelight still danced across the hearth, the remnants of embers glowing in defiance of the chill. He looked up from a stack of ledgers, eyes heavy with worry and sleeplessness, only to meet the intensity of her gaze. "I understand now," she began, her voice steady, carrying both vulnerability and strength. "You did not act to cage me, Ronan. You acted to protect both of us from the same mistakes that haunted your mother. But we cannot continue bound by fear, nor by convention. I care for you, deeply, but I cannot ignore my own desires, my own life." Ronan's chest rose and fell rapidly, a storm behind the calm surface of his features. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, absorbing her words, gauging their weight. Then, slowly, the tension in his shoulders eased, replaced by a resolve as firm as the stone walls surrounding them. "I will not be your jailer," he said, voice low but unwavering. "And I will not force you into a life you do not wish to claim. We will face your father's wrath together, but we will do so as partners, not as captor and captive." Evangeline's heart lifted, a tremulous spark of hope igniting into a steady flame. Yet she sensed the gravity behind his words, the risk he was willing to shoulder. Delaying the wedding, funding her studies in Paris with a chaperone, exposing himself to scandal, threatening his family's financial stability. It was an act of defiance, but one steeped in love and trust. "Ronan," she whispered, stepping closer, their hands brushing until their fingers interlaced. The warmth of contact, the certainty of alliance, seemed to anchor her, steadying the storm that had raged within her for weeks. "If we do this, if we defy expectation together, promise me we will not waver, even when the world turns against us." He drew her into an embrace, their foreheads touching, breaths mingling in the intimate space between them. "I promise," he murmured, voice heavy with sincerity. "We face this together, Evangeline. No force of duty, threat of scandal, or tempest of family will separate us. Not if I can prevent it." The moment lingered, delicate yet transformative. The manor's shadows seemed to recede in the glow of their renewed commitment, as though even Blackthorn itself recognized the shift. The garden outside, still dripping with rain, reflected the sunrise's first golden rays, a mirror to the possibility now stretching before them. Growth was no longer fragile, it was inevitable. Evangeline stepped back, her gaze sweeping across the library, past the hearth, past the ledgers and letters, and finally resting on Ronan. "Then we do this," she said, her tone resolute. "Paris, the ateliers, and our hearts. We will navigate both side by side. You and I, not duty and obligation, not fear and expectation." Ronan nodded, a rare, full smile breaking across his features. A smile that softened the stern lines he had worn since inheriting his title. "Side by side," he repeated, the words both a vow and a declaration of war against tradition itself. Outside, the storm began to dissipate, clouds thinning, light spilling over the manor's stone walls. The lock glimmered under the emerging sun, a quiet, liquid promise of renewal. And within the walls of Blackthorn, Evangeline's heart swelled with courage, no longer fragile, no longer trembling at the prospect of what her father, the world, or fate itself might demand. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe freedom and love were not mutually exclusive. With Ronan as her ally, she could claim both. Their hands remained intertwined, fingers laced as if sealing the pact, and in that simple touch lay the power to withstand any storm yet to come. The turning point had arrived. What had once been despair now bristled with possibility. Hope surged, courage flared, and the path forward, uncertain, dangerous, and yet undeniably theirs, awaited. And though Henry's wrath would not be denied, though society would murmur and obstacles would arise, Evangeline now knew she had a partner, a co-conspirator, and a lover in Ronan. Together, they were no longer prey to circumstance. They were architects of their own destiny, poised to face the world and claim a life forged from both passion and resolve. The dawn outside brightened, the greenhouse beyond the library catching the first rays of sunlight, the marble busts glinting with the promise of creation. Evangeline's hand rested lightly on one unfinished piece, her mind alive with plans, her heart unbound. In that quiet, electric moment, she realized the truth that had eluded her through months of fear. Strength was not in submission, but in defiance, in choosing boldly, and in choosing together. And so, with courage renewed and hearts intertwined, they faced the day, and whatever trials awaited, undaunted. Months had passed since Blackthorn Manor had become both sanctuary and crucible, yet Paris now hummed with an entirely different energy. The ateliers of Montmartre were alive with chatter, the clatter of tools, and the earthy scent of wet clay and polished marble. Light poured through tall, arched windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits over tables crowded with sculptures. Figures frozen in moments of beauty, defiance, and longing. Evangeline moved among them, hands coated in clay, fingers tracing the delicate curves of her latest piece. A woman emerging from stone, shoulders squared, eyes alight with a gaze that spoke of freedom earned. Each sculpture bore the essence of Blackthorn. The lock's mist, the manor's cold stone, the whisper of lavender in the greenhouse, and, woven into them, the narrative of her heart. Yet no amount of art could shield her from the ache of absence. Days of creation had been punctuated by letters, whispers of Ronan's estate struggles, and a longing that carved hollow spaces in her chest. Her life here was a triumph of skill and perseverance, but it was incomplete. And then, like a storm breaking across a sunlit sky, he arrived. Ronan burst into Maitre Laurent's studio, the rhythmic chime of chisels interrupted by the pounding of his boots across wooden floors. His coat was damp from Parisian drizzle, yet his gaze was steady, fierce, and entirely focused on her. "Evangeline," he called, voice ringing over the clatter of clay and the soft hum of apprentices at work. She froze mid-turn, hands smudged with gray clay, heart catching in her throat. The barriers of doubt, distance, and months of separation shattered in an instant. His approach was deliberate, yet urgent, each step closing the space that had grown unbearably wide between them. "I came for you," he said, kneeling before her, the faint scrape of his coat on the floor sounding impossibly intimate amid the atelier's bustle. "Not because duty demanded it, not because anyone ordered me to, but because I choose you. Always you. My estate, my title, my reputation. I risked it all, Evangeline, for the life we deserve together." The words struck her like sunlight through storm clouds. Months of longing, worry, and tentative hope condensed into a single pulse of exhilaration. Her chest swelled as tears pricked her eyes, unbidden, the raw truth of his declaration washing over her. She reached for his hand, feeling the warmth, the solidity, the certainty she had craved. But triumph's path is never without friction. At that very moment, Henri Viscount Duval entered the studio, his cloak dripping with rain from the streets outside. His eyes blazed with authority and indignation. "Evangeline, Ronan, this is an outrage. You defy my wishes, your station, and your duty." His voice reverberated off the walls, mingling with the rhythmic strikes of chisels, turning applause and whispers of admiration from students into a tense hush. Evangeline straightened, clay-streaked hands on her hips, every ounce of her months-long struggle coalescing into courage. "No, father," she said, voice ringing with clarity and conviction. "This is the life I choose, not bound by politics, not bound by fear, but by choice, by passion, by the love we forged together." Ronan stood beside her, his figure tall and unyielding, a fortress of support and defiance. Henry's furious gaze met Ronan's, but the younger man held firm, unflinching. "You threatened us with duty and consequence," he said, voice steady. "But love is not optional, and it is not a crime. We face the world together or we face it alone, but we do so freely." Henry's fury faltered, replaced with a grudging acknowledgement of their resolve. He could not command hearts the way he had commanded lands and titles. Though his pride was bruised, He saw that resistance was futile, and that Evangeline's spirit could not be restrained by threats or decrees. With a stiff nod and a muttered concession, he withdrew, leaving a silence that felt less like surrender than acceptance. Relief washed over them like the Seine in spring, smooth and inexorable, flowing around every tension, every doubt. Their gazes met, and in that shared glance, the glimmer of triumph, the recognition of mutual sacrifice, the unspoken promises. They found the culmination of every risk, every stolen moment, every tender word spoken across stone corridors and misty locks. Ronan reached for Evangeline, hands brushing the clay on her fingers, and pulled her into a fervent embrace. Lips met with the heat of restrained longing, hearts beating in sync, breaths mingling in a space that had been carved from courage, defiance, and undeniable love. Around them, the atelier seemed to exhale with them. The clatter of chisels softened, students held their breath, and the sun outside bathed the room in a golden glow, illuminating dust motes like fleeting sparks of magic. Subplots resolved themselves naturally in the afterglow. Henri, though proud and unyielding in appearance, granted reluctant blessings, softened by the undeniable maturity and resolve of his daughter. The estate, once a source of political tension and financial strain, found salvation through new alliances forged by Ronan's careful negotiation. Partnerships built on respect rather than obligation. Evangeline's sculptures, inspired by her trials at Blackthorn, garnered acclaim, their ethereal beauty a testament not just to talent, but to resilience and courage. Months of separation, doubt, and fear were replaced with shared laughter, quiet moments of creation, and tender, unguarded glances. Paris, with its sunlight, cobbled streets, and ateliers, became a haven where duty and desire coexisted, not in conflict, but in harmony. Evangeline and Ronan's union, now forged not by arrangement but by choice, became the fulcrum upon which their lives would pivot. A shared destiny built on love, trust, and the courage to defy convention. As they stood together in the studio, fingers intertwined, Evangeline allowed herself to feel the depth of the moment. The city hummed beyond the windows, the clink of tools and soft murmurs of students blending with their own quiet heartbeat. Triumph was not a single instant. It was the culmination of months of perseverance, honesty, and unwavering courage. And in this triumph, Evangeline knew that she was finally irrevocably free, not just from her father's shadow, but from the fear that had once held her heart captive. They held each other long after the world had returned, letting the embrace speak for everything they had been unable to articulate in words. The sacrifices, the longing, the promise of tomorrow. Outside, the Seine reflected the sunlight like liquid gold, mirroring the beauty of a life reclaimed, a love chosen, a legacy redefined. And in that atelier, amid the scent of clay and marble, the rhythm of creation, and the quiet triumph of hearts undaunted, Evangeline and Ronan began the first day of the rest of their lives. Together, unbound, and fully alive. The carriage wheels crunched over the familiar gravel of Blackthorn Manor, a sound that had once heralded dread and obligation, but now resonated with triumph and belonging. Evangeline, seated beside Ronan, gazed out at the estate's sprawling grounds, transformed by months of care, vision, and collaboration. The lock mirrored the morning sun, a liquid gold ribbon winding through highland mists, and she felt a surge of peace, a sensation that had seemed impossible during those early, storm-lashed days when fear and duty had ruled her every step. The greenhouse, the heart of her artistic rebirth, had been restored to life. Sunlight streamed through sparkling panes onto marble and clay alike, illuminating sculptures that carried the essence of her journey. Women emerging from stone, figures of defiance, hope, and reclaimed agency. Local apprentices now moved among the benches, clay-streaked fingers shaping their own creations under Evangeline's gentle guidance. Her laughter, bright and unguarded, echoed across the greenhouse, a sound that once might have seemed foreign to Blackthorn's halls. Ronan walked alongside her, hands brushing hers, his presence steady and unyielding, yet softened by months of introspection and transformation. He had embraced flexibility in the management of the estate, understanding that leadership was not merely about numbers or tradition, but stewardship of land, people, and the hearts of those he loved. Their marriage, once teetering under the weight of expectation, now thrived as a partnership. Ronan balancing legacy and responsibility, Evangeline infusing creativity and humanity, both shaping the estate and their lives with equal passion. Society, once quick to murmur and scorn, could do nothing but admire the couple's bold choices. Henri, Evangeline's father, attended their delayed wedding, his usual sternness softened by reluctant pride. He moved through the blooming gardens, offering a quiet nod of approval as Evangeline and Ronan exchanged vows beneath an arch of ivy and roses. The whisper of petals in the gentle breeze seemed almost to applaud their defiance, the subtle murmur of neighbors and onlookers blending admiration with astonishment. Even those who had doubted them could not ignore the radiant certainty in their expressions, the strength of two hearts that had endured trials too great for ordinary souls. The estate itself flourished under their joint stewardship. Innovative ventures inspired by Evangeline's artistic eye transformed neglected wings into studios, galleries, and learning spaces. Villagers once wary of aristocratic oversight now participated as collaborators and students, forging a community where art, enterprise, and legacy coexisted. The loch's banks were lined with wildflowers she had planted, their riotous colors reflecting her liberated spirit. Her sculptures stood sentinel throughout the grounds, immortalizing moments of struggle and triumph, their forms whispering stories to all who passed. In quieter moments, Evangeline and Ronan strolled along the loch's edge, fingers intertwined, hearts unburdened by secrecy or fear. Conversation flowed effortlessly. The mundane delights of household affairs, the intricacies of clay and chisel, and the daring dreams yet to be realized. Sometimes they walked in silence, content to let the rippling water, the scent of wild lavender, and the call of distant birds speak for them. Hope, once fragile and fleeting, now enveloped them like a second skin, an eternal companion to their love. And there was the promise of tomorrow, tangible in the gentle curve of her belly. A child, a living testament to their unity, their courage, and the fusion of dreams both daring and steadfast. Ronan pressed a hand to her stomach, eyes glinting with joy, and Evangeline rested her hand atop his, feeling the rhythm of life growing between them. It was a symbol of renewal, of continuity, of love forged not by obligation but by choice, strengthened by adversity, and tempered by the fires of passion and mutual respect. Evenings brought serenity. The manor's halls bathed in the warm glow of candlelight and firelight. They shared quiet dinners in the library, music drifting from the piano, laughter ringing over the clink of cutlery, and whispers of affection that required no grand gestures to convey their depth. Memories of past storms, of harsh words, cold corridors, and midnight despair, now seemed distant echoes, haunting only to remind them of how far they had come. As the sun dipped behind the highland peaks, casting amber reflections across the loch, Evangeline paused on a balcony, her gaze lingering on the horizon. Ronan joined her, arms slipping around her waist, and they stood together, silent but united. The world beyond Blackthorn could still harbor challenges, but they faced it as one, fortified by love, trust, and a shared vision. In the culmination of trials, tension, and triumph, they had discovered a truth deeper than any inherited title or societal expectation. That love, when chosen freely, could reshape not just hearts, but legacies. They had faced despair, danger, and dissent, and emerged unbroken, their spirits entwined in a bond unassailable by circumstance. And as the first stars glimmered over the loch, reflecting in waters as calm as their reconciled hearts, Evangeline knew, finally, that freedom and fulfillment were not only attainable, they had been claimed. The greenhouse thrummed with life and creativity. The estate prospered, and their family, now expanding with the promise of new life, symbolized a future shaped by courage, partnership, and love unshackled. In that radiant moment, with the world quiet around them and their hearts aligned, Evangeline and Ronan embraced the fullness of their victory. A life where art and legacy, passion and duty, love and independence coexisted in perfect harmony. The loch whispered its approval, the manor stones echoed their laughter, and the horizon promised many more dawns of hope, joy, and shared destiny. The story of Blackthorn, once steeped in constraint and fear, had transformed into a legend of hearts unchained, a tale of resilience, courage, and love chosen against all odds.